Welcome, everyone. This is the December 18th meeting of the Advisory Committee on Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights. We do not have a quorum right now, so there is some business we won't be able to take care of immediately, but just for meeting minutes, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves so we can get it recorded. I'm Leanna Fellis, Chair.
Katie Bryden, Vice Chair.
Marie Robinson, Superintendent.
Ani Collette, Planning Officer.
Debbie Laurie, City Manager.
Thank you so much. So number one on our list today was approval of meeting minutes because we do not have enough people to do that. We will parking lot that to the January meeting. Thank you so much. Number two on the agenda today is the land use code update discussion.
So our consultant is actually, it should be a panelist on here and he's going to do a presentation. Chris, yeah.
Hey everyone, hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna stay camera off. I look happier there than in real life. I've been sick for a couple days. Let me go ahead and make sure I can share my screen here. All right, so I've got just a brief PowerPoint here that we'll walk through. And then if you all have any comments or questions or anything, happy to have a discussion. As you know, we are just kicking off the update to the land development code that we are calling Blueprint Bangor. We started back in September, so we're really just getting started with our understanding of the city and what needs to happen moving forward. Just a little bit about us first. Camiros is a national practice. We're a multidisciplinary firm, so we do everything from zoning ordinances and development regulations to, downtown plans, master plans, design guidelines, economic development, and even landscape architecture. We do have a national zoning practice, so we work all across the country in communities large and small, everywhere from Baltimore to Buffalo to Chattanooga, Davenport, Iowa, Dallas, Texas. Lots of different places. We do have some really recent Maine experience. We just wrapped up with the city of Portland the beginning of last month. We're currently working with Bath, Maine as well. So familiar with the development environment that is happening in Maine. In terms of how we think about zoning and updates to land development regulations, we're not dogmatic, so we aren't going to come with a solution in search of a problem. We're not the firm that's the form-based firm that says form-based is the solution to all of your issues that you're having, or Euclidean zoning is the solution to all of your issues. Really, what we want to do is identify issues and problems that are occurring with the current regulations, and then use the right approach to solve those. So everything from those kind of more traditional or Euclidean or use-based kind of zoning tools to form-based zoning tools, things that are looking more at the relationship of buildings to each other and to the built environment, thinking about heights and setbacks and those types of tools, to even performance-based kind of controls. So most of the codes that we end up putting together are hybrid codes, so they use kind of a mix and match amalgam of a bunch of different zoning approaches, with the idea that code for Bangor should really be designed to address Bangor's issues. We also use a really kind of heavily data-driven approach. So you'll see that we try to leverage geographic information systems analysis. So all of the data that the city has on hand in terms of lot sizes and setbacks and uses and zoning and where things are and how they're built on the ground. So how is development actually manifesting versus what is on the books or what's required by the current code? Looking at that data really helps us to see where the disconnects might be occurring and where we might need to put in a little bit of extra effort to help things align. It also allows us to identify issues as those might arise and to test solutions, so that we're saying, we've seen that there's a problem with the lot size in this district, and we've tested out a smaller lot size, and that's going to get you X amount of increased conformance, those types of things. And we also will seek to produce maps and build outs and other kind of educational and informational tools throughout the process using this data to really help facilitate understanding and decision making among the public as well as elected officials. So as you all know, the Land Development Code is really the primary tool for implementation of the city's comprehensive plan. And as the primary tool for implementation of that plan, we kind of have to be familiar with what's in there. So we've been spending some time looking at the city's comprehensive plan and pulling out some kind of thematic discussion points that we need to be aware of and considering as we're working our way through the code. The first of those is looking at increasing housing diversity and expanding options within the city. So how can we help to support the provision of a variety of housing options that are really going to help meet the changing needs and desires of people who are living in Bangor or who are interested in living in Bangor, whether it's, you know, a young family looking for the right option for them, or empty nesters looking to downsize, making sure that there are options and that there's choice built into the housing market for people. And that includes affordability as well. Making sure that we're looking at tools that can help us to increase supply of housing units, specifically in and around downtown, as that's called out within the comprehensive plan. Thinking about things like transit proximity, access to services and amenities as we're dealing with housing issues, making sure that people have the opportunity to live somewhere where they can walk to meet their daily needs. And then just looking generally to expand the city's palette of tools to consider things like adaptive reuse of existing structures, conversion of existing non-residential and potentially larger residential structures, and other tools like cluster development, even single room occupancy, tiny homes, all of the tools in the toolbox really to support the city's housing goals. The comprehensive plan also speaks to protecting environmentally sensitive areas and directing growth within the growth boundary. We really want to make sure that we're ensuring that regulations are working to protect the city's wealth of natural resources and encourage sustainable development. And that can mean things like looking at and updating the landscape requirements that are within the current code, making sure that we're comprehensively addressing landscape within the code so that we have the tools to help us address things, impacts like heat island effect and stormwater runoff. Making sure that the regulations are working to encourage new development and dense development in areas that can actually support that development and the density, while continuing to protect areas that are outside the growth boundary. So some things to think about might be, how can we incentivize infill development in those parts of the city that are already built out? And looking at zoning tools that can really kind of facilitate that, like form-based code, that can encourage or require some sustainable design considerations along with those. In terms of supporting economic development, how can we make sure that the code really supports pathways to entrepreneurship within the city? So things like allowances for new uses might be like shared workspaces, business incubators, things that aren't discreetly addressed by the code now. How can we build those in? How can we create a set of regulations that really support downtown development to reinforce downtown's role as a destination in the region and encourage continued investment and development within the downtown core? Looking at and making sure that we're updating the commercial zoning within the city to make sure that the regulations that are in place are flexible enough to allow Bangor to respond to market shifts. You know, we all came off kind of the cataclysmic impacts of COVID, and we're looking at those now, and everybody wants their zoning to be nimble enough to respond in case something like that happens in the future, right? So how can we expand mixed use options and places where mixed use can happen within the community? Looking at expanding allowed uses, considering emerging uses, whether they're, you know, those pathways to entrepreneurship that I talked about, or some additional innovative uses that I'll discuss in a little bit. Making sure that we're evaluating and updating the palette of industrial districts within the code, so that that can continue to help support that economic base within the city as well. And then even looking to expand commercial opportunities within the city's existing neighborhoods. In terms of transportation and accessibility, I want to really make sure that we're encouraging and accommodating multimodal options within the city. So people, you know, have the opportunity to not just drive wherever they're going, but that we're anticipating and supporting additional modes, whether those are biking or pedestrian activity. You know, we know that many residents within Bangor do still rely on automobiles, and there are parts of the community that are really auto-centric, but not everyone has access to a car. Not everyone has the ability to drive a car. Not everybody wants to drive a car. So how can we support those choices through the Land Development Code? And then social service considerations as well. We know that Bangor is kind of the social service hub for the region. So how can we acknowledge that and continue to allow those types of uses that benefit vulnerable populations in the places that make sense within the city moving forward? So coming off the comprehensive plan and just really looking at our initial take on the zoning code, as I said, we're just kind of at the beginning of our process. We're starting to get a little bit more familiar with what's in the code. And so we made some preliminary observations. The first of those has to do with the organization of the current code, or rather, I guess, the lack of organization. If you're familiar with the code, you know that it can be somewhat confusing in terms of where things are located. We would like to reorganize, compartmentalize, group things together so that like controls are grouped, so that you just have one place within the code. If you're looking for a set of regulations, you're not dialing into 5 different chapters within the code to try and get the breadth of one single kind of requirement or thematic requirement. We really want to bring the base zoning districts forward as kind of a key organizational element. They're really sort of the heart and soul of the code. The uses in the districts really serve to help everything else meet the ground. So we want to bring the base districts forward as an organizing element, create much more of a graphic orientation and improve the legibility of the code. So inserting illustrations, diagrams, matrices everywhere we can to make this information more accessible for folks that are trying to use the code. And then doing things like updating and clarifying definitions and measurement methodologies. So making sure that things are clearly defined and that they're defined just one time so that there's no risk of conflicting definitions or things like measurement methodologies. We want to make sure, for instance, that we've got one method for measuring the height of a building. And that's the way that we do it in every district moving forward. In terms of uses, just initially, we would recommend organizing them into a global use matrix as opposed to the lists of uses that are within each organizing them into a global use matrix as opposed to those individual use lists that are within the zoning districts in the current code. Making sure that we're clarifying things like what is a temporary use versus what's an accessory use and what's a principal use. Consolidating, reorganizing some of the use standards. So these are standards that would really kind of work to control how some uses operate or are built on the ground. Some uses have specific impacts that we need to control. So taking a look at those use standards, consolidating them. Some right now are included within the definitions of uses. Some right now are included within those long lists of uses. Some are included in various parts of the code. So kind of reaching out, grabbing all of those and bringing them together. Addressing emerging and creative uses. This can be things like specialty food services, could be like a coffee roaster or a candy maker, industrial design operations, things like artisan industrial uses, glass blowing studios, those types of things that really aren't kind of discreetly acknowledged within the code right now, but that if they were, could potentially be allowed in more places, pulled out of sort of a larger use category. And then also thinking about things like a neighborhood commercial establishment use to really help with that idea of building in access to goods and services to meet people's daily needs right within their neighborhoods. And then finally looking at evaluating and updating standards around things like manufactured home parks within the city, and making sure that things like tiny home parks are addressed adequately as well. So just an example here up on the screen of what we talk about when we say a use matrix and organizing the uses into a use matrix. What you can see here is that it's kind of nice because all of the uses that are defined within the code sit in those rows on the left-hand side. And then all of the districts within the code are organized as columns. This is not a set of uses for Bangor, and these are not Bangor's districts. This is just an example, so don't try and squint at this and make any sense out of it because you won't be able to. But the nice thing is that, if you're interested in doing something like opening an art gallery, you can kind of scan across that row and see which districts within the city would allow that use. Likewise, if you've got property in a particular district and you want to kind of see what uses are available to you within the structure of the code, you can find your district and then kind of scan downward. And anywhere where I talked about use standards, so those standards that would control specific impacts of uses, those would all be referenced right within the table as well. In terms of the current zoning district structure, we're going to end up recommending that it be restructured and really work to align with the future land use that's within the city's comprehensive plan. We're going to be looking at things like lot sizes within the current districts, making sure that those work based on our analysis that we're doing, as well as gaps that have been identified. So, there may be a need for additional urban districts as we start reviewing how the districts actually work within the current code. Looking at the commercial district structure to really make sure that it's capturing that full spectrum of commercial activity and mixed use activity that's occurring within the city. So this is everything from sort of that smaller transitional commercial that happens around neighborhoods to kind of that corridor scale commercial to the larger kind of regional stuff that's happening. Like think about areas out by the mall. Consider new approaches to handling industrial within the code as well. So taking a look and making sure that we've got a set of really kind of true industrial districts that are facilitating and allowing industrial that may have some outside impacts, as well as the potential for a mixed use kind of variant on the industrial formula, where if you've got areas that are kind of experiencing the encroachment of various mixed uses, it could be typically there's the brewery, there's the CrossFit, there's the dog daycare, it could be indoor soccer that starts coming in and occupying some of these areas that were formerly industrial. How can we allow that to happen in a way where that mix can really work and then also serve as a tool to direct that type of development away from what we want to preserve as true industrial areas within the city? We want to look at integrating dimensional tables into the districts. These currently don't really slot very nicely into the code, and they're kind of hard to find. They are just attachments to the code currently. And then looking to bring in design standards. So not being the architecture police, but really just looking at those kind of key elements of good building design. So making sure that buildings address the street, that they've got transparency, people can see in and out, people know where the entrances are. Just a really basic set of standards to improve the quality of design. We want to simplify and clarify dimensional standards that are addressed within the code. So making sure that we're really clear about, what is a side yard versus what is the front yard versus what's a corner side yard. Sometimes those terms can be used incorrectly or conflated or interchangeably. And we just want to make sure that we're super clear about that. And then other things that are within the code right now, things like minor yard and area variations that are allowed by the code enforcement officer, things like front setback averaging, setback reductions, all of those types of tools that are within the code, but a little bit difficult to access. How can we revise the district standards just to maybe build in some of those flexibilities without forcing people through a process to get there? In terms of parking and site development, we're going to look at all of the parking standards within the code, look at updating the parking ratios. They're currently a little bit on the high side, and make sure that all of the parking requirements are tied specifically to uses within the use matrix. We're going to look at additional parking flexibilities and what might work. The first thing that comes to mind is, where can we expand those exemptions from the parking requirements that are currently in place downtown? Are there areas of town where we could consider parking maximums as opposed to minimums to really prevent overbuilding of parking, addressing parking lot landscape comprehensively, so requiring both perimeter parking lot landscape as well as landscape on the interior, again, dealing with things like stormwater runoff, really kind of intercepting that water before it hits the pavement. Create comprehensive landscape standards, things like buffer yards that are currently in attachment 1, which isn't part of the code. Again, kind of consolidating all of those, making sure that they work in a coordinated and legible way. And then looking to update things like lighting standards as well. So that was a lot to take in. Just to remind everybody, we're right at the beginning of the process here. It's really a 3-phased scope of work. The first phase, the phase that we're in right now, is the evaluation phase. So we've been talking to groups of stakeholders and just starting our analysis of the code as well as GIS analysis. this phase is going to culminate in the spring of next year with what we call the technical review report. And what that report is it's essentially a synthesis of our analysis of the code, as well as what we've heard from various stakeholders and groups like you all. And it's going to kind of lay out what we think are the issues with the code and a series of approaches that we'd like to take as we begin drafting the updated code to really build consensus around those approaches so that we can move into the drafting phase, which is the second phase. There are going to be a series of drafts reviewed both internally with staff and then published for public review as well. So there will be a public draft, presentations to various boards and commissions, a whole public process around this with plenty of opportunities for people to provide us comments and feedback, as well as redline public drafts, moving into the third phase, which is the adoption phase, where we're going to take it through public hearings and then hopefully as well as adoption. So with that, going to open it up for discussion. If anyone has any comments or questions, happy to have a talk. I'm going to mute myself for a second and cough quite a bit.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Does anyone here have any questions?
I just
Or out online? Yeah.
wanted to fill in a few gaps and just provide a little bit more background. So as Chris kind of got to this is really to implement the 2022 comprehensive plan, which was adopted last year. And we had come to you all before, I think, about the comprehensive plan and getting feedback on that. And that plan really covers a very broad scope of issues in the city. It doesn't just touch on zoning and land use aspects, but it touches on, everything from economic development to cultural resources. Housing was a large part of it, and environmental protection, multimodal transportation, transit was also included. But one of the main aspects of the comprehensive plan is how do we it's a guide for our zoning, and there's a land use plan in there that basically it separates the city into different land use areas, like neighborhood commercial, for example, industrial. And that's to help us kind of figure out what the zoning should be. And so that's what we're going through now with this process. And as Chris was talking about, the land development code needs an overhaul as far as organization and usability, user friendliness. We hear about that all the time, that it's hard to navigate. So, this why we're coming to you is to really get your perspective on our code and zoning and thoughts about how it can be improved. So just wanted to start with that.
Great, thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Anya. And thank you, Chris. You did a great job, even being so, I felt for you in your
Thank you.
throat.
Thank you.
That was a really very, very comprehensive overview. I had to prevent myself from asking questions because I don't need to know what a heat island effect is, but that is your job and I trust you fully. I would love to hear more, Anya, about what the process has been like with your team working with, I guess it's Camiros to develop Blueprint Bangor. How has that process been besides our group? What other groups are you working with? I know that you obviously, I can't even begin to imagine what you do every day. And I trust that obviously I know that you're working with like Penobscot Climate Action, and I've seen you in a bunch of different groups to make sure that some of these elements are addressed. Has that, some of the questions that I have, I think it really comes down to when things are brought to our attention, like what are the transportation changes going to be? How are we going to make this more walkable? Like I said, I know you're on all these calls, so I know that you have the information. How is that working to make sure that this blueprint does reflect what you've already heard from the comprehensive plan and the other groups that you're working with?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start with, who we've reached out to so far. We've gone to other boards and commissions, including the council committee. We have had, I think it was 7 neighborhood meetings in different parts of the city where we were trying to get as much public feedback as possible.
How did that go?
How did it go?
Yeah.
It went well. It was, we heard from a variety of people. And they all had, their own concerns about their different neighborhoods.
Okay.
So we did get some valuable feedback from that, which I'm working on compiling. And I'll be sending to Chris soon, and then also going to council with that. In addition, we have talked to, and I know Chris has talked to some stakeholders as well, like landlords, realtor groups. I've talked to some people from the agricultural community and also the tribal community. And I feel like we've kind of run the gamut with like
Yeah.
trying to reach a bunch of different groups in the city. And as part of those neighborhood meetings, we've also been asking people about complete streets principles. So complete streets being, how do we make our streets accessible to everybody? Pedestrians, bicyclists, people using wheelchairs or other devices. And so we had maps and stuff at these meetings that we were trying to get, specific feedback from people on. So I'm compiling all that as well. And I plan to work with, kind of take that to engineering and public works and kind of talk about those things that we've heard. Complete streets and, multimodal transportation, it does coincide with land use in some ways, but it's also kind of separate because it is in the public right of way.
Mhm.
So, in some ways the processes are different. But one way the land use, changes can help is really by encouraging that density and making things closer together, because that does make, things more walkable, it makes transit easier and more efficient, to operate. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it definitely did, because like I said, I think that a lot of what we do in this committee is talk about what other groups that we overlap with that would benefit from this kind of information and this kind of insight. And like I said, I've seen you on a lot of those overlapping groups. And so things that I know are priorities, like this whole it has a name. What is it? Like the 15-minute downtown, what is it?
15-minute city or?
Yeah,
That-
right? That it's like everything is close
Right.
and walkable, and
Right.
what kind of feedback from those types of conversations where they're prioritizing that accessibility and having access to food and being able to walk there and being able to sort of meet your commercial and home needs are just
Yeah.
some of the things that I've been hearing. And like I said, I've seen you there, so I know that you're having these conversations. I just didn't know how that was
Yeah,
being
and that,
transcribed.
yeah, so that was like, I won't say the 15-minute city exactly was a strategy in the comprehensive plan, but the basic concepts of that were strategies in the comprehensive plan. And so Chris and his team are taking all of that into account, all of those listed strategies when they're looking at the land development code. So.
Thank
And
you.
just to jump back in for me too, we are right at the beginning, which is kind of, it's both an easy part because all of the ideas are game right now. And the land development code really does interface and intersect with lots of other kind of sets of controls that live within the city code and, other various city policies and discussions that are happening. And it's really kind of our job at this early stage to parse out exactly what we can build into the code update, right? So, we're really looking to reach out and get a lot of various perspectives with the understanding that it's difficult right now because, you all don't have anything to look at. This is just kind of all, philosophical to a certain extent at this point. Once we have, some more public facing documents like that technical review, as well as even public drafts of the code moving forward, that's when we're going to be, expecting that we'll get some really good feedback from everybody else that we're talking to, right? Various stakeholders. Take a look at this. Let us know if this works for you. Let us know if this is, doing what you all think it ought to be doing from, a neighborhood walkability perspective, or, if you're something like a biking advocate, is this doing everything that we can do within the context of the development code to kind of further those policies? And it becomes kind of easier once you have stuff to read and react to. And I know that, at this point in the process, it's like a whole lot of information and then what do you think? And it's just it's kind of a difficult thing. But it will get easier as we have stuff for y'all to look at too.
That's super helpful. Thank you both very much.
I just have a couple of questions. I'm just assuming the comprehensive plan is on the Bangor City website.
Yeah.
I can find that here. And then have there been discussions, or would you be open to student involvement in any way? So like high school students, and when we talk about multiple stakeholders and, this process just sounds so fascinating that there may be some, students who might be very interested in digging in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to get their feedback too. I mean, because we didn't really have that perspective on the city from students, so. Students and then also, young families, like we heard from people who weren't exactly in the young family category, talking about what young families need, but like we didn't hear from young families, so like.
Yeah.
There's multiple demographics that would be great to hear from, so yeah, definitely.
Great, maybe I could get your contact information.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. To that, you didn't, who you've talked to, you haven't spoken to. I'm wondering, have you gone into any groups related to disabilities, hearing about what those groups might need, or aging population? If you could talk a little bit more about some of the more minoritized populations, the ones that
So-
might not get out as easily.
Right, so it is really difficult to try and reach all groups, and especially when like I don't know exactly who to reach out to in those groups. So that's one thing, like if you have ideas for who to reach out to, that would be great. We did have one person who did have a wheelchair who showed up to one of our meetings, and it was great to hear from him on his feedback. But it would also be great to go to groups if, if you have suggestions. But as far as the aging community, we did go talk to the Livable Communities Committee, which is really kind of focused on aging in the city. So, but yeah, definitely as we move forward, with drafts of the code, it will definitely try to reach as many people as possible.
I was gonna say, I think what I heard Anya say too, especially in response to Marie and to Leanna, is part of the reason she comes is how do we make those connections to groups that may not be as well represented to this point?
Yeah.
So,
Can you say which 7 neighborhoods you went to?
So we went to, and unfortunately, it was hard to find a location that really represented the whole city, but,
Sure, yeah.
we went to the Fairmount neighborhood, the area around the Bangor High School, and then around EMCC, and then Cohen School. We also went to the Cape Part area. We were at the Boys and Girls Club, and, also downtown. And I feel like I'm forgetting one, but those are the ones I remember. Yeah. And we did go to some pop-up events too.
they were at the election.
Yeah, we were at the election. We got a lot of, we talked to a lot of people there. And then also the Sidewalk Art Festival. And we're gonna try to do the same thing again once the draft codes come out, so.
That's great. Anything else?
I do sort of have a question, but it's not so much of a specific question, just mostly because I'm not super familiar with zoning, but I do know that depending on how zoning is done, it can negatively impact gentrification in communities. So I did hear that mentioned briefly, and I know I was late, so I missed probably the first at least 5 to 10 minutes of this presentation. But as far as the zoning is concerned, we know that Bangor has seen like some pretty rapid gentrification happening over the past 5 years since COVID. And we've got issues with housing. And I know that is something that the city has been working on in regards of just rezoning areas and creating more like ability for growth in housing. But as far as kind of putting more like stipulations in place as to what kind of housing can be built in certain areas and trying to encourage more housing that's like affordable for people who are kind of more like lower income to working families. Because I know you did mention, like you heard from people who are saying what working families needed, but you weren't hearing from the working families. And that probably has to do with the fact that they're just really busy.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, they're working, they're trying to survive. So, are there stipulations being put in place when you're doing this zoning, when you're doing this redistricting, to look at what kind of housing can be built in these areas to really encourage more affordable housing for people?
Yeah, Chris, do you have thoughts on that?
I do, and they're not So gentrification and, affordability, these are really complicated issues, right? And they're impacted by so many things. Zoning and land development regulation, obviously one of them. Market conditions, zoning can play a role in gentrification, but it's really the combination of zoning and kind of that shifting market conditions and desirability of certain areas that can really drive gentrification within neighborhoods. I think what we're really looking to do is to take a look at the built environment within the city, really look back at the types of housing forms that were historically built in Bangor, right? So, not just single family and multifamily housing, but everything from duplexes to triplexes to quads, and allow that diversity back into neighborhoods within the city. Just providing options, I think, is kind of a key way of dealing with some of these issues. Zoning does not, unfortunately, it doesn't control everything, and zoning can't really control the market, but zoning can kind of either get in the way or get out of the way of the type of development that the city wants to see, and in providing affordable options. So if you've got a set of zoning districts that are requiring large lots, and large setbacks, and combining that with market conditions like a high cost of land, you're going to see development reflect that, right? So you're going to see lots of sort of single family that are pricing that square footage accordingly so that developers can make their money back. If you provide additional options in terms of, smaller lot sizes, additional development forms, you are providing options for the development community to come in and provide, housing products that are available to a whole lot of residents at different price points. So it's one of those things that's not super cut and dry in terms of how zoning impacts those things, but it's really just allowing within the code for a variety of options, so that the community can really respond to those. That was a little bit of a roundabout answer. It's difficult to give a straightforward answer about something like gentrification and zoning because there's not really a super straightforward connection between them.
It is definitely a complex issue, but it's also, I feel like, where we do have a large population of people here in Bangor that can't afford the housing that exists here. And we want to be able to keep these people here because they're the ones who are working in our grocery stores. Some of them are our teachers. Some of them are the people who keep our spaces clean. Like, they need to be able to afford to live here. So that's a concern that I had, but thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the main driving issues of the affordability crisis is lack of supply. And that over time has been driven by exclusionary zoning, by keeping things more single family only, and making it hard to make that missing middle housing like the duplexes and triplexes and stuff. So now we have this shortage of housing, so that drives the prices up because everybody's looking. So the hope is that by allowing more of these things, then we'll drive the supply up. So, yeah.
I had a question and I'm so sorry. I love what you just said about options and using the zoning to our favor on that. But oh yeah, one of the things was in the next phase, is that where we'll have sort of more concrete information on, you said that there was going to be zoning that reevaluates what mobile home and tiny home parks and all of these new options that we have. When will we be able to see that and give feedback on it?
I think the rough timeline was later in the summer of next year or maybe in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, so the first thing is the technical review report, which will kind of highlight some key issues, right? So not everything that needs to happen with the code or not everything that folks have talked to us about will show up in that report. It's really kind of the higher level stuff, those larger kind of structural issues. There will be discussion of a lot of that as well as approaches that are in there. So, it might say, and I'm just making this up now because we don't know what these recommendations are, but it might look at manufactured home parks or tiny home parks and say we need to adjust some of these standards so that they work, and we'll identify that and say here's what we think should be adjusted to make it easier to develop in these ways. But that's not actual code language. The idea of that technical review report is to have kind of a document that says, here are the issues, here's how we think that they can be solved. Gain consensus around that, right? So that we know that the community is generally okay with these approaches, and then move into drafting of actual code language. Drafting of actual code language, as it's regulatory and legal in nature, is just by the nature of what zoning is, it's kind of a little bit tougher for folks to kind of sink their teeth into, which is why we like to have that more kind of the policy and regulatory bridge of that technical review document, so that people can kind of see what we're going to do, and then have the opportunity to come back once we actually have drafts of the code language and see how we did it. And so that technical review report is slotted to come out sometime later in the spring. And then after that comes out, there will be a public process around that. And then we're going to move into the actual drafting of the code, which is, as you can probably expect, a little bit longer, more intensive process.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
I'll just add one thing, and I think I'm gonna dovetail a lot on what Chris and Anya have said. You know, Anya talks about, you know, the exclusionary zoning based on lot size and what you're eligible to build on a particular plot. Some of that shift has already occurred with the adoption of LD 2003, and we've updated our code accordingly, so that you can have up to 4 units on a lot, depending on the lot size. So some of those changes have already come in. And Chris was talking about the need to basically maybe look at doing a reset of our base zoning, and talked about ensuring flexibility. And I think what will happen is, by allowing flexible living situations, it will lead to greater diversity in our neighborhoods. And I think that's a positive. But I also liked the building standards and the landscape standards, because to have such great visual disparity in a neighborhood also can contribute to a lack of a feeling of inclusion, that your house looks like this, and there may be some aspersion based on that. So I think the standards and the diversity and the flexibility are all gonna actually.
You know, I think this obviously wouldn't be addressed in the code, but I think part of it, what Gabrielle's pointing to is, I can definitely think of a drive I make where I see the same style of house. You know, if you turn a corner, right? And, you know, how sympathetic are we being to Bangor's identity
Correct.
in this plan, in the conversations? You know, I think that's super important. You know, I don't love going through downtown and seeing buildings that look like a replica of something I've seen in Boston.
Correct.
You know, so it'll be interesting to see what the actual language looks like, you know, what these recommendations are, you know, and what the appetite actually is in Bangor for that style versus, you know, something.
Yep.
Old New England.
I think it is really important to people to preserve the kind of, I don't want to say character, but maybe like the architecture of what we have here.
Yeah.
You know, and when we talked to people at the meetings, like, there were people who were, you know, more strongly single family, but we had some, what's called pre-approved building plans, some, potential, like triplexes and fourplexes and stuff that are, some architects drew plans for. And when people looked at those, they're like, well, I might be more okay with it if it looked like that. And it was that more traditional New England style. So I do think that does really matter.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I know you said that, but just while we're talking about landscaping and obviously the beautification, we talk a lot about working with the Wabanaki Cultural Group here about native plants. So I'm assuming that conversation has been a part of when that landscaping will look like in terms of.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, but I just wanted to go back to, you know, talking about some of the groups that we should reach out to. Did you all have any suggestions right off the bat? Or that?
I have some recommendations. I think there are a few day programs that serve people, adults specifically with disabilities in the area. A lot of them are actually right next to our schools, like Fairmount and Mary Snow have day programs right almost in their parking lots with Amicus and Momentum. And these are groups that are constantly out in the community. That's the entire goal of their work. So I think it would be really interesting to get feedback on not necessarily where they're zoned to have their day program, but in terms of walkability and access, and when the programs are scheduling out, what are we going to do with adults all day that really want to connect with the community? What do we need? We can't just go to Walmart every single day and pretend to shop for groceries. It needs to be something that's, I think, replicates an actual lived experience. So I can connect you with folks at those group homes if that would be helpful. Excuse me, not group homes, day programs, they're not group homes.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking of parents of children who are currently trying to figure out what community their children will be living in. You know, are there spaces, what that would look like? And I think it'd be interesting to hear from them as well. I'm just trying to think how we could.
I do think that day
Connect them.
programs and group homes would be two totally different conversations, but both of them would be equally important.
Mhm.
One for just the access and, like I said, sort of ability to engage in, you know, life
Right.
with ease in a group setting. And then to your point, not having these group homes in these like isolated, you know, sort of like back parking lot,
Right.
dark homes, where it's like, this is where people with disabilities live.
Right, the idea that there is spaces, I don't want to say shared spaces, places that are, you know, you see this in other countries where individuals with identified diagnosis have the ability to have their own space, a level of autonomy, yet, but there's still some sort of supports in place nearby or something. We don't, outside of like if you have a lived home pro, that's not something that's, you know, here that I'm aware of. But you can look to other countries to see that, and that's why I was wondering if parents would say, because we do wonder what happens after our children turn 18, you know. I'm just wondering if other parents feel that way, that those are things that they look at and would consider. And I'm just trying to think of how I could connect you to that group of people.
Yeah. Do you mean parents with children with disabilities?
Yeah.
Primarily?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Just connected you all with you, yeah.
Thank you. Multitasking.
I don't do it in the moment.
Agreed.
But I
Yeah,
think
but I
we-
can respond with some context.
Okay,
And it'd be a super interesting conversation.
yeah, definitely.
I think we're also really interested to see what the draft plan says when that comes out and looking at that for sure.
Yeah, I do think though, like you mentioned, kind of talking about the walkability and accessibility will be a slightly different conversation, but something that, you know, we're also talking about. And we are also looking, specifically at accessibility of city facilities along with these other things. So it would be great to have that conversation.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from like all of the information that was shared about like mixed use facilities. Because again,
Yeah.
so much of the day programming is planning for adults to interact with the real world. And really, it's like, we all get in the van, we all go to the grocery store. By the time we get everybody back in the van and go somewhere else, we'll do one trip a day, and that's not how people live their lives. It's not. So if there are opportunities to say, have a mixed use space where folks could grocery shop, not just for day programs to have a day outing, but even for me, like if I'm able to go, you know, to a grocery store and then, you know, meet a friend for dinner and then go pick up my kids from an after school program, like those sort of mixed use facilities, what that walkability looks like.
That's the goal of changing them all over, is to make it into one of those places that you could do all of that in, right?
Yeah,
Let's talk about that.
Different
Let's talk
conversation,
about-
different
let's talk about what
time.
to do.
I just want to piggyback off
Yeah.
of what you said though, because like that whole importance of community cohesion
Mhm.
is huge. And
Yeah.
I was reading this, I don't want to say it was a news article because I don't know if it was, I don't remember. But it was at least,
Cite your sources.
it could have been something, it could have been a research thing for school. I don't remember. It was at least a year ago, but it was talking about how communities over in Europe, specifically cities, have managed to maintain the village feel because every part of the city has a center. And the example that they were using was in southern France, where you've got these cities that have obviously expanded because they've experienced population growth. But within these cities, you have districts. So you might have like a neighborhood where you've got the buildings, you got the courtyard, and everybody lives in the buildings above, and then the courtyard area on the first level is where you have the cafe, it's where you have the market, it's where you have the flower shop and the bakery, and everything is right there. So you can go out your door and everything that you need is right there, and you're going to see your neighbors, you're going to talk to people because you're walking. And it's been proven to show that not only does it promote less conflict within the community, but it also improves people's mental health outcomes, it improves physical health outcomes. And like what you just said, reminded me of that, because it's so often that what is best for the people who are the least advantaged among us is actually what's best for all of us. And so kind of following that model, and it's mixed use.
Yeah.
That's the answer to everything is mixed use. It's not industrialization, but it's mixed use of small locally owned businesses along with housing, along with parks and restaurants and everything. So it's more together. And I think we have that downtown.
Yeah.
And I think that's a large part of why we've seen so much growth and change in our downtown, just since I moved to this area, it's changed so much. I came back to Maine 8 years ago, 10 years ago, this literally next week. And it's changed for the better drastically, but we have to maintain affordability. And they have rental regulations in Europe and most of those communities, it's made so it is affordable for people and people don't get priced out. So it's not just a luxury that's only afforded for people with the most money who get to live in those communities.
I know you mentioned looking at things coming down the pipeline. I know I was at an event recently where the chamber was saying they're fielding a lot of calls from people out of state wanting to move to the area, and that's great.
Yeah.
But I think that also is going to have an impact on affordability. So I was
Right.
wondering, how is that being brought into the comp plan, that kind of research to see how many people we think might be moving to the area, where they're
Especially
coming from?
where we're relying on increasing the housing stock as our only solution for bringing the cost of housing down, because if people are just gonna keep coming here, then.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's our only solution, but I was just saying supply is one of the main
Yeah.
drivers of affordability. But there's many different strategies in the comprehensive plan, about housing affordability. As far as out-of-state people looking to come here, I know in the comprehensive plan, it's very hard with projections to kind of get a grasp on that anecdotal aspect of it. I think the most they were able to look at was what is the state office of, I can't remember what it's called, but they do population projections. And then also the census data. Unfortunately, I do know that when we did a housing study recently and they did get some more data on population and population change, and we're not seeing currently a growth in population. But that's not to say it won't change, I think at the most, like I was talking about supply, ensuring that we do have this flexibility and these allowances for people to create more housing. I do think that'll help, because otherwise we're just gonna have so much demand and so little supply. It's gonna keep driving prices higher.
Yeah.
I don't know if Chris has anything to add to that, but.
I mean, I think I think you're voicing a lot of my thoughts, Anya, too. And also just to, it's going to sound like I'm being a downer, but the land development code is just one piece of the puzzle, right? So we can make updates to the land development code that are in support of a lot of these policies, and that really work to implement all of the policy considerations and discussions that the city has already had with various groups that have gone into the comprehensive plan, right? There was a whole big public process around the comprehensive plan. A lot of these discussions have been had. The land development code is really one piece of the puzzle. And I think, when Anya was talking about affordability, there are a bunch of strategies that kind of live outside of development regulations that can be part of the process. But I think, from our perspective in specifically working on the land development code as part of this project, that a lot of the work is in getting out of the way, right? Historically zoning codes have gotten in the way of housing production. And so I think one of our key goals is just to make sure that we're allowing for those options, that we are kind of pulling back a lot of the previous restrictions that were in place just based on the guidance of the comprehensive plan, and understanding that, the community needs more housing, the community needs more housing at different price points, that, there need to be more options. And that was, one of the first things that I mentioned in terms of what we connect to the comprehensive plan was just, revising the land development code so that those options are available to people. If somebody's looking to come and build in Bangor, that they can see that, they're not just going to be pushed into a single family form or, a large sort of denser multifamily form, that there are a whole bunch of options at their disposal now that they can use. And ultimately those couple with, city policies and other things that are in place that live outside of the land development code to really kind of build solutions on solutions. But what we're really trying to do through this process is allow for more, allow for flexibility, and allow for those options to happen. I'm the zoning guy in a lot of these conversations, and the zoning guy has to be super realistic, right? And unfortunately, zoning cannot make things happen, but zoning can get out of the way, and zoning can set the table for things to happen. So
We just need you to zone us into like a nice European villa. So I expect to see too.
And I think not just supply, but diversity of housing types also helps. And we have added quite a few new uses, like co-living facilities, and boarding homes a while back. So we're always looking at new things that we can add that meet a variety of needs. But just to get back to what you were talking about with the village concept, it's interesting that you bring that up, because it is something like we've heard a lot from people about, this desire to see like these village hubs, and not just downtown, but
Yeah.
throughout the city.
Yeah.
And in the comprehensive plan, in the land use plan, part of that, it delineated the areas of like Union Street around the airport mall, and then Broadway around that shopping center as neighborhood residential, which I think would be lower intensity commercial, but more mixed use residential commercial, with that smaller scale commercial. And so I think, following up on that will help us with the zoning, will help us hopefully over time create those neighborhood villages. And the mall too, like we rezoned that to allow residential and mixed use commercial residential. So it'll take a long time because development happens over a long time, but hopefully over time we will have those more. So
I think we have a really good foundation for it here, because like you said, we do have those areas. But I feel really bad for anybody who tries to walk to the Union Street Mall right now.
yeah,
And same goes for the Broadway area. Like it's not a walkable area. You really have to be either in a car or you've got to be taking the bus, because it just does not feel safe for pedestrians, just simply because there is so much traffic.
Right.
But yeah, it's good to hear that is the long-term plan for zoning, because it would be nice, and I think we do have the potential for that.
yeah. And I want to note too, BACS, our comprehensive transportation system, they applied for what's called an EPA Community Change Grant. And part of that grant, and we haven't gotten it yet, so I don't know if we will.
You're so confident.
But
Of course, we're gonna
I
get
think
it.
it's a great application, so hopefully we
Yeah.
do. But part of that was to do engineering studies on our major corridors like Broadway and Stillwater and Union, to see how we can make those more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. So hopefully we get it, and that'll be a start. So,
That's
Very nice.
great. That is really
Yeah.
cool.
yeah,
Cause you do see, like, you see the before and afters of like, I don't wanna say like which cities, cause I cannot remember, but where they used to have like 5-6 lane highways. And maybe they moved the main roads underground and they turned that space all into walkable green space. And just kind of really encouraging more pedestrian activity and people talking to each other.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you just think of how many neighborhoods are around Bangor High School, that families would be so much easier to walk. I know the students do walk down there sidewalks, but yeah, any increase in that evaluation of all the ins and outs, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I don't think there's anything else. Thank you so much for your presentation
That was
tonight,
great.
taking our
Thank you.
questions
Thank
and
you.
all of that. Please come back anytime.
Okay.
All right, thank you
Feel
all.
better.
Yeah, seriously.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So much. Thanks, Anya.
All right, thank you.
Have a great holiday.
Thank
Yeah, you
you.
too.
I do just want to note for the meeting minutes that Jason Caniff joined by Zoom and Gabrielle has joined us in person. Still not enough for quorum.
Yeah.
But they are here. So we have nothing for policy tonight. Number 4, state of the committee future planning. We were gonna have Kara come tonight. Unfortunately, she is under the weather, so we're having discussions about moving that discussion to the next meeting and what that might look like. So again, any review the ordinance thoughts, put it on paper so we can have a nice fruitful discussion about that and how we want to see it go for the next year and beyond. Any updates on the appointments other than what we?
So they continue to do interviews.
Okay.
There were some more interviews this week.
Nice.
So I'm not involved in that process. I don't see it, so.
Can't ask for
I'll-
names.
Yeah, no. So I'll hear more next week, I
Okay.
think,
They
so.
also interviewed the high school student and the college student.
So I know they were still looking. I don't know
Mhm.
if that was part of the application.
Okay.
So, yes.
But I would like to share with our superintendent that we are always looking for student reps on this committee. And obviously, like all things, students are very busy. But being able to have a student representative and if there is any recommendations of who to even talk to at the high school.
I think Dana
Yeah,
Mhm.
it would
is
definitely be Dana.
probably the best connection, or she was
Mhm.
the.
Have we specifically asked her?
I don't believe I have, but maybe, Marie.
Would you be
can follow
comfortable
up.
asking her?
Sure, for this committee.
Student
Yeah.
recommendation?
Mhm. Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
Yep.
Thank
I'm
you.
also meeting with my student advisory committee in the morning, so.
Yeah, that's
Excellent.
Nice.
We would like one of them, please.
That would be great. Once a
I
month
can ask them. I mean,
commitment.
these are like, these
Yeah.
are the really, really busy
Yeah.
kids.
I was gonna say,
and
like, any
kids.
non-burned out honor students, emphasis on the non-burned out,
Mhm.
not like pre-burned out, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, those exist.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I just,
I can ask them.
when, the last time I think that we had a consistent
Isabel.
high school committee member, it was really fantastic because they were able to overlap a lot of the ideas and the things that we wanted to have here at a level at the high school, like creating a comprehensive welcome packet, something we talk about doing as a city all the time, that she developed for the high school.
This is the
Remember
student
this?
you've talked
Yeah,
about.
yeah, and that kind
And it
of.
was like her final project.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
and that kind of overlap, if there are students that maybe have an overlap and an interest at a larger level, that they could sort of catalyze that energy. And share some of that enthusiasm that we could better support them and.
What about Marwa's daughter? Sure, she's booked up.
That
And
is
she would
honestly
be-
the key. We get people who are so involved and passionate
Right.
about
She
things.
would be
There's
great.
so many things.
Yeah,
She's telling me all about that. yeah.
that kind of, yeah, exactly, that kind of work and experience and interest and really building a sense of welcome and belonging at the high school is really what we're trying to do here. And so I think about this all the time while we're on the topic of the state of the committee. If there is sort of, what is that secret sauce where the school department is able to bring together these thought leaders in different areas about DEIB and really put into action these changes that are going to create a more welcoming space at a school level. What are we missing at a city level? And I mean, is it as big as there's too many things that the city is focused on and it's hard to be such a microcosm? Or is it simply like, this is a bad time for busy people to meet? I don't know what it is, and I feel like all I do is think about it. And I'm glad that you're here because you obviously have experience, with that committee and seeing how they've operated. And something that we've talked about for a long time and obviously had Dana and previous superintendents report to us. That's something we're going to evaluate when we're looking at the ordinance. I will say it's funny, something that we've been talking about with the evaluation of the ordinance has been, is the Advisory Committee for Racial Equity, Inclusion and Human Rights a tangible name? Whereas yesterday, the conversation at the high school was, in a new administration, is promoting DEIB work safe and good. So it's kind of interesting to have those conversations because they're opposite, but still connected in terms of like, we're trying to simplify and say the word, like say DEI in our work.
But it's also so stigmatized right now, and it's
mhm.
only gonna get worse.
So,
But that could also be a reason for why we should adopt it, just rub it in people's faces.
well, yeah,
Sorry.
exactly.
But.
No, but true, that's obviously, you know, part of the conversation that's been happening.
But to things like trying to have, you know, the thing that we've noticed over time, which is dwindling participation. Whether it's the same people because we're getting tired, because it's the same people, or we're overcommitted to so many things. When I think about high school students, you know, the ability to identify someone early, and is there a way to cultivate them so that they see the work that we're doing? So it's not scary. Like, it's one thing to be in a group with your peers. It's another thing to come into city walls and halls, be on camera.
Yeah,
and
a bunch of scary growing.
say something, yeah.
We're
and,
very
you know,
serious.
is there a
We're
way
terrified.
to cultivate that, have them come into meetings and listen, get them, you know, subcommittee, things that we'll discuss later, but I think same way with higher learning, if there's ways that we can, we're not the big bad, you know, it's not as scary, that would be good.
Yeah, you talk about having the conversation in January. You know, how would people feel about just making January a work session? All we talk about, it's the only thing we talk about, is here's the ordinance, what do you wanna do? And because we, you know, we continue to talk, but we're not moving anywhere, so let's all sit in a room
Yeah,
for 2 hours and let's bang out some suggested changes. and
Great.
Suggested
I
amendments.
love that idea. That's why I'm here.
And, you know, do we maybe do it somewhere else?
Mhm.
It's still a public meeting, the public is still welcome to attend. But give
Are you
me the-
inviting us over to your house?
No, but I can, I can,
Yeah,
but I can find you a space.
We're going to Bay
You.
Central, I'm sorry.
So we just did, our council, we did some initial goal setting and priority setting. And we did it at the Parks and Rec Center.
Mm.
And if you're talking about why you need a new Parks and Rec Center. Going and seeing the
Just go
Parks and
visit
Rec
it.
Center.
Well, tell me what you think.
And then, if we're not meeting here, we have a lot more flexibility as to dates and times.
Mhm.
The reason this meeting is the time it is and the date it is it is the only night where there is not already a meeting being televised.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this has to be videoed and like.
It doesn't
live?
have to, you can
Because
actually do.
That could be a barrier. but
Correct,
Depending on
correct.
where you are, but if you don't have to do that. then
Correct.
Yeah.
Do we know how many people watched
Mobile.
this meeting
I
live?
don't, and I can ask Cody if they.
That would be worth
If they
finding
can,
out.
yeah.
But see, but part of the,
I'm all for
because we
transparency.
started during
Right.
COVID, right? So our meetings were online.
Correct.
And then we were all came back in, but then one of the things that we definitely took to heart was the fact is that if we are a community that's
Correct.
talking about
We
accessibility,
need to talk to it publicly.
we have to have it available. So
Yeah.
that could be Zoom for people, right?
Yeah, and I think it's worth, I mean, is
But
this
if we can do a work session, like 1 month, and then we come back and we do a very public session and say, this is what we've done.
That was
I like that
also,
idea.
that was also in my head, again, in my matrix of why is this not working? Was work, having an active working meeting.
Correct.
And I think that we started off like that, and then we we're like, no, there's too much to do, let's have committees, and then let's give updates, and
Right.
that seems to stagnate. Or should we
So
have,
do we have like 1 month is the working meetings, the next month it's the committee meetings, and then we create the structure.
and we
where
have
the
very
work
clear
groups-
goals?
Correct.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have a lot of municipal facilities. So if there are 3 committee members who want to talk about that and come back, they can.
And also on that note, because I really love that idea, we could also make it so any presentations that are done, like what we just
Right.
witnessed, is available
Right.
online. So people who
Mhm.
can't attend that meeting,
Correct.
they can do it in their own time. And then people can prioritize which meetings they come to, because like we have an attendance problem.
Correct.
But like maybe they might show up because they're gonna think, oh, we're gonna be doing some work
Correct.
today. I want to be there for that. I just don't want to sit there and listen.
And then you come back to the group as a whole and you share that work, because to
Mhm.
your point, it's important that we publicly share the work we're doing. Nobody needs to, it's an old fashioned saying, nobody needs to see the sausage being made. They can come to the factory and
They just wanna see
participate
that
if
it's
they
done.
want to, but
They might be interested in how it's made.
they might.
They don't need to watch. it.
So, I mean, can
Yeah.
we? Yeah, kind of break that process down a little bit.
So
I would
think-
love to evaluate that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's plan for sort of a workshop session in January. Now I'm gonna be,
I was just gonna ask you, I was like, not to,
Mhm.
so be a downer or call out the elephant in the room, but are you gonna be here
yeah,
in January? When is your, when are you?
It's not in
May?
May.
not till the end of May.
Yeah.
Are you gonna be on vacation?
But I am gonna be on
I
vacation.
knew that.
That's, all right.
I
we'll make a
do try to go to a warmer climate.
We'll fill you in.
For a
on
little
what we're
bit.
doing.
To
Yeah.
this point, however, we do have people who are ending at the end of the month.
Correct.
We would still say it's open to them to come in
Oh,
because they've served.
I
and we
think-
want their
yeah.
input.
I would think it would be, it is a public meeting.
Yeah.
And so if you have,
And also people who are just good joined, they're not gonna
Correct.
know.
and if you have people who want to
No offense to
participate,
them.
and I think of like Andre, so Andre's been one of our longer tenured
Yeah?
individuals.
Yeah.
And I think he'd have a good perspective on
Yeah.
sort of, I'd like to hear what he has to say
Would,
and to add to the conversation.
The more voices, the better.
Correct.
would your plan then at that working meeting be as well that we also do all the normal startup year activity, or you want it solely? Because I think that topic of itself could go on for a while.
Correct. So we can do,
We can talk about the stock line
Yeah.
too.
Okay. all right,
Just
we're
in the
getting
interest of
excited
time.
here. Let's leave on
Yeah, you
excited.
guys are both planning it. and-
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
You're gonna be here, right?
So we're going on to
Right.
number 5.
Right.
We're going to get an update on the discussion for the MLK Day event. Was that you two giving an update on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Katie and I were able to meet with, it's a small planning group. Some of whom are members of the NAACP, one of whom we believe is going to become the new chair of the NAACP. So they, for years, had the breakfast at the University of Maine. There have been some changes up there and they feel that there's an opportunity. So we talked to them, they'd really like to do it at the Cross Center. And we're like, well, yes.
Yeah.
So they are actively planning as to what that will look like to have that breakfast at the Cross Center in 2026. We actually said, well, you're kind of missing the chamber connection, because really they
Yeah.
pull a lot of their attendees from the university.
Yeah.
And it really felt like it wasn't as open and
Right,
group
it felt
as I
very
might have thought. So
Insular or whatever.
we
Yeah.
made some connections to the chamber, so they've been talking to Deb Newman about how, because obviously they'll need to do some sponsorships and things like that, so we thought the chamber was a great connection. The other thing that we talked about is there an opportunity to make it more than just the MLK breakfast? Is there an opportunity to make it an event? So you have a breakfast and maybe there's a film or maybe there's a discussion
Panel or
and you
something.
bring in the library so that you make it a more,
Mhm.
I mean, not that the
Yeah.
breakfast isn't powerful in and of itself,
Right.
but to really celebrate it and make it more of a robust.
Mhm.
Make it more like
Right.
involved too than just
Correct.
people showing up, sitting and eating and leaving.
Correct.
I love the idea of a short documentary, but I like the idea of a panel discussion a lot more.
And I think too, the reason that the breakfast has been successful is it's early, it's typically some folks have to work that day. So we had also talked about like, even beyond just that one day, what can
Right.
we do, is a panel discussion a week after, to really expand not only the awareness and the work, but also that partnership, especially, because I think also were folks from the Maine Multicultural Center on that planning group too, or was it just the?
I didn't think
NAACP?
so.
Okay,
I don't recall.
Surprised by that, I would.
Because we
expect-
just talked about them,
Yeah.
we talked to each other by first name, so it wasn't always clear
Of who was with which group.
who was with which group.
Right, but I
Correct.
think that there's so many opportunities.
Correct, but to
for-
take something, a long.
Yeah.
Standing, well-respected event. And use it as a springboard,
Yep,
and, you know, they're saying the majority of the attendees were students.
yeah, yeah.
And so, let's broaden the audience, let's look for opportunities.
Mhm.
So they were pretty excited about that.
Yeah.
I have not, so right now their breakfast planning meetings are at, what, 6
Fridays?
o'clock at Fridays. I'm like, I'm gonna freely admit, I have not joined one of those yet. But the meetings they're doing right now are to finalize their plans for the January 2025, which will be at the University of Maine.
Yeah, and they said that tickets are not available yet, but once they are.
Yeah.
I'd really
Yeah,
love for
if you all wanna
any of us
go,
that are
yeah,
interested.
yeah,
to
We're
be
happy
able
to do
go
that.
and learn.
Yeah.
My question, and I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to say it out loud. A lot of what the planning group was looking at was the burden of cost for renting the Cross Center.
correct.
So is that something that our group would, how does that work sponsorship wise or payment wise?
So the city often sponsorships
Okay,
activities.
okay,
It doesn't fall outside of the norm of anything we already do.
okay,
So we think there are opportunities like that. I think also as groups work with the Cross Center, it is about, you know, people will come in and say, well, I want to do this. Well, there's a, you know, until you've really kind of dug down into the details, it's hard
mhm,
to kind of come up with a final proposal.
sure,
So the Cross Center will continue to work with groups throughout a year. And one of their sponsorship ideas, which is why we turned them on to the Chamber of Commerce, we're like,
Yeah.
you have a large business group and ensuring
Mhm.
equity and diversion in the workforce, diversity in the workforce
yeah,
is really a priority for businesses, and you should be tapping into them
yeah,
and trying to grow that. So I think between all of the sponsorship opportunities and as they finalize, I think they'll find it, because they have said their cost have increased even at the University
Yeah.
of Maine.
mhm,
So
Yeah.
when you come in and you sort of get the sticker price, you kind of think, I can't afford it, but as you work through the details and you build those sponsorship, it's just something they haven't done yet.
right,
So it's
right.
gonna be a year.
Because it sounds like it was just sort of like a, you pay at the university for the cost of your plate, and that's it, like,
Correct.
that's not a fundraiser, it's not,
Correct.
you know, so they're just now covering the cost. So what are the opportunities to
Correct.
expand that and lower the cost,
Right.
even if it's gonna get more folks involved?
Yeah. And so the Cross Center has, you know, event planning staff and things like that that can help them suss out those details. And I did see that they did connect with the chamber because we were on that email
Yeah.
chain. So we've made some good connections. And the good news is we had that conversation last month and they're talking about an event for January of 2026.
I was just gonna say,
I think that's a great lead up for planning
That's our
time,
part.
because usually I'm talking to somebody in November
Right,
who wants an event in
Yeah.
January, and I'm like, it's
yeah,
hard to help you from there.
yeah,
That's a lot of ground to make
I
up.
like
so.
that. And I like the opportunity too, to have this connection with that group and we invited them to our meetings as well, because I think there's so much opportunity. They had talked about really building up, Juneteenth celebration
Correct.
in Bangor.
Right,
I think the NAACP of the Bangor chapter does a lot of focus on Ellsworth, and
Right.
that's just been the cadence and pattern, but they're excited about Bangor, we're excited about Bangor, so what can we do to?
and I think there's a
that
shift
together.
coming, and I think they have a lot of great ideas, and I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be one thing at a time. We'd like to take, to take
Mhm.
all of the bites, but we may need to only take one bite at a time. So they're pretty energized, and that's actually, I
Mhm.
went ahead and invited the person. I said, hey, do you want to join our committee? Here's a link. I don't know if that's happened or not, but, so, anyway. So,
awesome.
it's pretty exciting.
I'm glad they're talking about it now.
Yeah.
Really build up some enthusiasm and
Yep.
partners in the community.
Yeah.
That would be great. Did we actually have an update on street?
So I just wanted to check in. So my recollection was that there were no members that felt that there were any issues with the street names or the names, and that I was gonna follow up with the Historical Society.
Correct, although you sent an email about Pickering.
Pickering.
Yes.
All right, so I need to So interestingly enough, yes, and that's the piece I need to ask the historical.
That's what I was just
Society
gonna say. I was like,
about.
but
Correct.
I think that the solution
Yeah.
to that is
And they were,
bringing in the historical.
they were just
society.
finishing their capital project.
Yeah.
They did their,
They have a whole
they
holiday.
did their movie
yeah.
thing, so I'll let them get by the holidays and we'll get that straightened
Yeah,
out for
if
January.
they could come and talk to us about, you know, what information they have specifically because Pickering Square did come
Yeah.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and there might be other things too that we just don't know about.
correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, maybe February they could come.
I said we could just always go over. Take a tour of the historical.
So, but that's the point though, too. I would say that there are times it would be more appropriate, we've talked about it in the past, is to hold a meeting somewhere else.
Okay, February meeting's at.
Well, in
I don't know.
particular, since the first item on the manager update
Yeah.
is the city-owned property.
Yeah.
Amendment, you know, I think, you know, one of the things that we said is it's about us building partnerships with the groups that do have the knowledge base.
Yeah,
Correct. And so, you know, maybe we do a year of tours and maybe 1 year we do, maybe 1 month we do a meeting. Sorry, now I'm getting all.
no, it's okay.
I love it.
I'm just imagining like, oh, we're the tourism club now.
But if we did a
Here for it.
meeting at the Historical Society and we could do a meeting at the Wabanaki Public Health Building
Yeah,
and
That would be,
In their spaces,
in their spaces. You know, this isn't about everybody coming to us.
right?
It's about
I
us
think that's an
going to
excellent
them.
point, because we have to hear directly
Correct.
from the people.
Correct.
yeah.
So,
On that note, would you like to do a manager update?
sure. So a couple of quick things I will add. I know at times we've come back with some regular updates, regarding our homeless response. I hope you've all seen that we ended up delaying the
The end of
closure of the
February.
encampment. Yeah. And it's really tied to we expect a large influx of units to come online, which will create movement in the system. So that's why we picked February, the end of February. We have, finalized what's referred to as the by name list. So, one of the, strategies that you use when you're working in an encampment is you have a by name list, so you know exactly who you're working with. So that list has been closed. We know who those folks are. They're engaged in one form or another, with most likely the path workers or outreach workers or the home team who also do outreach. We went out today, city staff went out last week. There are a number of areas that, no one is currently living in. There are, you know, there's debris left behind. We identified those spaces. And today we went out and posted notices that we will be in there clearing those spaces next week with equipment. We've made it very clear. They've spoken to everybody out there. They understand these are not spaces where people are living and spaces where people have left. One of the things we struggle with is when we actually get people into housing, they just walk away. And we need to clear the space and be able to demonstrate the movement. So we're gonna be clearing some of that. It is, if you are not on the by name list, there are a number of individuals who will not engage in any way, shape, or form. And so we're gonna be having a different conversation with them at the end of December to say, you can't, if you're not participating, you've had all of these opportunities. And so what's your exit strategy? Because it's not gonna be here. Some of those individuals represent risk to others. And their safety and well-being, and it prevents people at times from engaging, so we're gonna kind of.
is
We'll
that a
handle
large
those-
number?
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. No, but. You know,
Have there been any movement of individuals out of the encampment to other parts of Bangor that we know of?
no. No. There are a handful of folks that, you know, that space can be transient in nature to begin with. People move in and out of that space in a pretty fluid manner. There are a number of people who are just there during the day. Some of them were former residents, some of them weren't, they come back, it's their community, to Gabrielle's point, it's their community. But, no, we haven't seen, and there are some people, as the weather gets colder, who all of a sudden, there's an opportunity, they may couch surf. They may have family who may be willing to allow that. We have provided a number of reunification opportunities. And I know earlier today, we had a lease signing with someone who's with a couple of people who have been, if you had asked us 4 months ago, we would say that those couple are really entrenched and will not. And that time has paid off. And one of them signed their lease today,
Nice.
and the other one has a space that they're going into, at least they're going into January 1. So there's good things. There's good things. So that's where we are in the encampment. The ARPA, next week, the council is gonna vote. And it kind of circles back to housing, which is why I wanted to comment on it too. In the end, so back in June and August, the council made some orders to dedicate somewhere around $2.7 million to housing and infrastructure improvements. Since then, we've had a couple of folks who have come in and said, geez, we can't use the money, the project isn't gonna go forward, so we've de-obligated those. We've also had a couple of projects that came forward and said, yeah, we really think we're gonna make it, and we're like, there's not enough certainty to risk losing that federal money. So we swapped the interest earnings out. We said, we value those projects and we want you to make them, but we can't take a risk that we turn federal money back in. So we're allowing those projects to go forward, but not with the federal money, with the interest we earned. So in the end, we're gonna have 2.2, 1.8, we're gonna have about $4 million. That's gonna be on the council agenda next week. And how the Department of Treasury has determined what an obligation is because we have a requirement to have everything fully obligated by December 31st of 2024. And a council order doesn't meet their definition of an obligation. And I understand that because the council order can be here today, and a week from now, the council can decide to undo it. So I get that. So we're gonna actually approve some interagency agreements with our own departments. So one of those agreements is with the Department of Economic and Community Development, which planning is a part of, and it's $2.25 million to support housing. At this point, it's likely going to go to the Grandview Avenue development. At this point, we expect to see sort of a site plan and that kind of thing in early January. We have met with the developers. They are honing in on a mix of probably some home ownership opportunities as well as rentals. It's been very clear what that price point we're looking at. And so my guess is it'll be about $2 million that we'll provide to build out streets, sewer, water, electric, sidewalks, all of those things, buy that cost down enough. The other one, it could be the quality housing provider program that I think we've talked about here. But the newest wrinkle is the opportunity to help Cedar Falls Mobile Home Park.
Yeah.
So with that change in state law, residents of mobile home parks have the opportunity to match the bid of a private owner coming in to buy their mobile home park. And so they did that.
Who was the owner of that community?
I don't know who the current owner was. We and Ann Krieg and I met with the two groups that are working with the property owners in the middle of November. And so they have a lot of their funding stacked together. So between ARPA money and CDBG money, we think we're positioned that if they're able to line up everything else, that we'd be able to help with an equity contribution.
And that makes the community residents the owners.
That's
of it.
correct. That's correct.
Excellent.
That's correct. And just by way of background, there's I believe there's currently 129 residents. I think 127 of them are owner occupied. The other two are owned by the current owners. I believe there's a number of currently vacant sites. And if I recall correctly, they have 49 additional sites that they're permitted to build out. So if you could add I think somewhere, I think the vacant sites were around 20 or so, adding 61 or 69 affordable housing opportunities in one fell swoop is pretty significant, so,
And as a co-op.
correct.
Do you know what their current lot rent was? for
I
that?
don't, we didn't
Yeah.
ask, it was just, we were talking about the premise and how we can help them, because they've got a lot of hoops to jump through, so that group was very strategic in what they wanted to talk to us about.
And just so I understand, all the money that
Yeah,
needs to be
Yeah.
redistributed because it didn't meet the timeline of the ARPA funds.
correct.
These are some of the ways that
Yep.
the city is
Yep.
redistributing those funds.
Yep.
Okay, that's awesome.
And the city council had already dedicated to, as I said, about $2.8 million for housing and infrastructure.
Okay,
But it took the form of a council order.
sure.
So this
Okay,
is just
I see.
codifying it as an agreement. So there's 2.25 for housing, and then there's 1.8 million for wastewater infrastructure.
Mhm.
So if you think about one of the more undeveloped areas within the growth boundary, or one of the most underdeveloped or underutilized areas, where would you say that would be? Would you say that would be in the area of Bangor Mall? So the Bangor Mall is currently underutilized,
No.
but if you think about the property out there
Eminent domain.
and you think behind Burlington Coat Factory,
Mhm.
so those large tracts of property that run from Longview Avenue over to Chase Road and up to Stillwater.
Mhm.
We've had a couple of property developers who've gone and looked at that, but we don't have any wastewater treatment capacity
Oh, interesting.
to accept that kind of additional flow.
Except into the river, just kidding.
Right. Oh, but that would be
That's not
the very-
authorized.
Wet.
Yes.
So we were always looking at the need to upgrade that pump station, the
Mhm.
so-called, so it's referred to as the Kmart pump station. So last year we worked with an engineer to evaluate our two pump stations. And so what we're talking about is taking that $1.8 million and investing it in the upgrades to the sewer system on that side, which will allow for the additional capacity that could be coming through the development of housing through that large tract property and or further development or more intensive use
Mhm.
than what currently exists at the back.
And are they thinking of, sorry,
Yeah.
you might have just said this and I didn't hear it,
Yeah.
housing, like, is it like commercialized, it's commercial?
It could be both.
Mixed use.
It could be any, because
Yeah.
if you think about it, that area behind Burlington Coat Factory, kind of tucked in behind there, we've had two residential developers come in and look at those properties.
Interesting.
So,
It's a lot of potential
but
there.
we couldn't add 500
Right.
residential dwellings.
Right.
But we could.
Well, we need to upsize some pipes.
Yeah, that comes first.
Yes.
Infrastructure first.
Correct. So, but again,
Yeah,
and it's always been a balance because we're also under consent decree with the EPA. So our requirement is that we have to reduce the number of combined sewer overflows. So in large surge events, there are things that will overflow. And so that was their primary focus with us. So it is, and it's important, don't get me wrong, but that's been how we've been required to invest all of our resources. So this use of one-time money that will support development of housing, commercial, et cetera.
Love it.
I
really
agree
exciting.
with that.
It's a smart use.
That's a fantastic,
Mhm.
fantastic plan,
Yeah,
especially if we're ever able to do anything with the mall, where
That's
that
correct.
is an established building, but
right.
it's got so
Would you like to say anything about
many.
the
Yeah.
current lawsuits?
No,
Yeah.
I would say that, we've filed our notice of violation. We responded to the event. We have not been able to get compliance with what we've asked, so we have filed what's referred to as an 80K motion. And that is the way that the city can enforce its notices of violation of its maintenance and land use code. That is the only way we can do it. I love it. There are a lot of people who say we just need to, and it's, well, we don't have the authority.
Mhm,
And the
Yeah.
authority is through the courts. And that is the route we are taking.
Just keep pushing.
What is
Because
it
the
called?
company,
80K? What did you?
the
call it?
company that.
It's called an
bought out-
80K. I don't know. I think it's called an 80K.
The
Or is it
company,
ADK?
I don't know.
That's what I thought you said too.
Yeah.
but this company that owns the mall
It's
has
like
been
when I was
doing
in
this
high
across
school.
the country and they just let these buildings rot. And I don't, from what I understand, a lot of communities have not, like, they don't have the resources to stand up against them. So like, we need to keep pushing.
It is not okay.
Yeah,
And so we're gonna pursue it in court. Because what we want is compliance.
Yeah.
We're not looking, you know, we just need you to comply with our ordinances. That's all I'm saying.
Sounds good. Year end wrap.
So just thinking about, I'm gonna look at Katie and hang my head.
Why are you hanging your head?
Katie, you're gonna draft an annual report?
Oh, yeah.
I knew that.
Like, oh, yeah.
That, I was like, oh God, what?
That's usually done in February, correct? The report.
I think we've done it January or February, but
I can do
just,
that.
I just wanna throw it out there while we're
Oh my
sitting
God, I thought
here.
it was gonna be like another like person leaving.
No, no.
I knew exactly what that meant right there. It's just like.
Cause yeah, Leanna looked at me and went,
Yeah. I got it before.
and do you wanna, so do you wanna try to find a different time in January? I mean, we had talked about the Tuesday meeting and it seemed to be a problem. Do you wanna try to stick with that same schedule for January?
Well, I
'Cause you've
think
got a
for
couple-
January purposes, where we do
Okay.
have new people coming in, I'm not sure what they've been told up to this point.
True, and it's likely that those individuals will not be appointed until January 13th.
Okay.
So it probably does make sense to wait until later in the month and do that. But I will say, not that you'll mind, but that does give you Courtney, because I won't be here.
Okay,
Okay.
We're gonna rewrite the ordinance.
since we have you here, was there anything you wanted to update about the schools and now that you've been in for?
Almost two-
Now it's a
two-
cat, right? Now you
There's
got-
a
you know
lot.
Everything.
Well, there's a lot going on, I would say. It's been really enlightening to be able to learn more about the schools and particularly at the high school as I'm learning more, just the multiple pathways that are offered to students is great. We're working on a campaign and really trying to own the narrative and cultivate a sense of belonging through some videos that some students and our director of community relations and safety have helped to spearhead. So I feel really, really strongly about that piece. We are looking at updating some of our HR practices and processes to ensure a more equitable opportunity for folks. We just had our DEIB second meeting with our what we're calling internal and external group combined, which is department members as well as external community parents and experts that are coming in. So we're taking a look at the last 3 years of work and really developing a roadmap and a plan to implementation for that. So we'll be able to circle back and say, here's what's happening. Paired with that, we are looking at quarterly updates of the DEIB work and how that's occurring and what updates are going on in the department. And we talked really heavily about the sustainability of any new initiative and how it's important to grow it from within. So I think piggybacking on what Deb said about different locations and meeting with the people. So I think it's important to look at where greatness is already happening because it is happening. And then how do you highlight and replicate and then begin to spread it from there? Because as you all know, any top-down initiative, like, here you go, like, it's the first step to that is a lot of resistance and, compliance-driven anything doesn't last. It doesn't last. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I said it. Was that just last night?
Yeah.
A lot of evening events. Just talking about it's the long game. right? And it's a slow process, but with patience and persistence, you can see a lot of change. And that's what I'm hoping for. And then also to continue to highlight the great things that are happening. I've never met a more dedicated group of staff that are there for the kid. Like they will give their shirt off their back for any of these kids. And the conversations that I continue to have are just solidifying that in my mind. So I'm happy with everything that's happening and excited for the challenges. I think it makes it all the more motivating for me.
Right.
Mhm.
Anything from the committee members? No? Nothing? Jason, anything? Go ahead.
In what may ultimately be my lasting contribution to the committee, I wondered if maybe now was the time to revisit the potential name change of the committee. Earlier in this meeting, there was talk about shifting into sort of working groups and then sort of alternating a working meeting with a public meeting, and I think that felt very aligned with the language that we had talked around sort of a DEI action committee or a DEIB action committee, and I thought maybe as my last pitch into the group here that maybe that's something that we would consider to consider that change for next year, and maybe that might positively influence participation, attendance, knowing that maybe we're a committee that is a bit more into getting stuff done, right? Like I love the energy behind like just having a working meeting and just like getting stuff done. More in praxis as opposed to talking about what we're going to do. We're doing things. That's just my thought there. Like I would love to see the name changed and something more punchy, like rebrand the committee in alignment with what appears to be the city's goals. Is that something that we can do?
I thought Debbie made a note of it, and I'm sure Katie has also made a note of it. You are invited to the January meeting. If you want to come in and be in that working group session, we would love for you to be there. Also, thank you for your participation this year and joining this very lively, passionate group, and don't be a stranger, please.
Yeah, my intention of being participating in with the city, with this committee was, as I said at the beginning, was to explore whether Bangor was the place that I wanted to bring my kids to. And so right now I'm currently in Indonesia with my kids for the holidays, and we're starting to have those conversations about what that might look like for a transnational custody, bringing my kids over here to Bangor. And I would say right now I'm optimistic and encouraged by what I've seen in this committee with the school system there, and I'm feeling pretty confident this be a place I can bring my kids. So thank you.
That's great.
We're sending you all sorts of positive
Right, we're doing-
intentions and vibes for you, and that it comes to whatever
Good
fruition
luck
you
with
want it to
everything.
be.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks for everything. Good luck.
I also know we're running over, so if there isn't anything else, we don't even have to make a motion in the meeting,
No,
do
because
we?
we're not really having.
We
a
don't
quorum.
have any.
Not enough.
Happy holidays.